Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chats on the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we are very delighted to welcome a very special guest, Bridget Gengler, who is the author of multiple books, including one that I actually read, Hold Your Head Up and Walk with Grace, which is a kid's book. Grace is one of my favorite concepts. So, Bridget, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we are delighted to have you. We appreciate you spending the time with us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well, thanks, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Bridget. So, children's books is one of those things that I think, there's a lot more to it than people see. Like if you get a children's book, I know as a parent, when my kids were young, they're older now, but you buy these books, and often they're not novels, they're smaller, right? And you still pay the same amount of money, and then you look at it and you think, there's not much to it. I could write one of these, but there is a lot more to it, right? Often children's books, aside from the illustrations, which I wouldn't be able to do. A lot of the authors don't do. They hire somebody or work with an illustrator that can help them. But usually these books have a message too, right? And you have to be very careful about what you write for children. And parents are often very discerning about what sort of books they want. Like Roland's saying, he likes the idea of grace, so he buys books that talk about that thing. And a lot of parents are like that. They're going to pick those books based on the topic. So a lot goes into to doing children's books. So I want to delve into all of that. So thanks for joining us. Why don't you start us off by telling us about yourself, how you got into all this, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I am an educator based out of California. I've been teaching for 30 plus years. I've always wanted to become an author. That was always a dream of mine since I was a little girl. And as I progressed as a teacher and started to really dive into teaching kids reading and writing, that became even more goal for me. It really happened with Hold Your Head Up and Walk with Grace. It was a book that I had promised my dad that I was going to write. My dad passed away 5 years ago. He was a writer. He was a poet. He never got to the point where anything was able to be published. So I had promised him when I spent the last days with him that I would fulfill our dream of writing and publishing a book. So that's kind of how Hold Your Head Up and Walk with Grace became that first book for me. It's based on a little girl and her dad. And it came from the inspiration and the encouragement that my dad always gave me throughout my life. And that is something my dad used to say to me when I would get discouraged, when disappointing things happened in my life. He would say, hold your head up and walk with grace. And that's kind of how that story developed. And then I really didn't think I was going to write anything else. I thought, I fulfilled that dream. I kept that promise with my father. That's it, until a colleague asked me, well, when's the next one coming out? And then I started to think, oh, well, maybe I could write another one. And I had You Have a Story to Tell, which is my second book. I had written that. It's a poem. It's a love letter to all my students, all the students I've ever taught, having them, wanting them to remember that they're important. They have a story to tell. What they say is valuable. I had written that years ago and kind of tucked it away. So I pulled that back out and looked at it again and thought, you know what, maybe this needs to become a book. It needs to be published. So I worked with an editor and, refined it and did all that process and found a really wonderful, wonderful illustrator. And that's how that book came into fruition. So everything started with that promise to my dad, with that little dream I had as a 5-year-old, but really, never really thought that it would ever come to fruition, until, sitting with my dad and having that conversation, everything kind of went in that direction. So that's how
I really loved the way it was the relationship between the daughter and the father, because to a certain extent, fathers sometimes get like ignored a bit in the speaking about the value that they provide as a parent. So I thought it was really heartwarming.
Oh, well, thank you. My third book, You Can Do Anything, which actually is launching tomorrow. That one is also the same little girl and her dad. And she's in that particular book, she's struggling to learn how to ride a bike. And her dad is encouraging her with the words, you can do anything you put your mind to. And those two stories, Hold Your Head Up and Walk with Grace and You Can Do Anything, really are based upon things that my father would say to my siblings and I. So after my father passed, we all there's 8 of us. So we all sat together and we wrote down all of the things our dad said to us through the years that helped to encourage us and helped to build our character. And so that one, it was also based on that same idea. So you'll see the same characters and the same illustrator. And that illustrator, for those 2 books I met, she's a fellow teacher out of Florida. And we met online in the, education Twitter world back around 2019. And that's how we became friends. And so she's illustrated both of those books for me. And she's done a lot of things within the books, within her illustrations, that if you didn't know me and my family, you wouldn't be able to necessarily pick out the little secrets that are within this in the illustrations. So she was wonderful. And then You Have a Story to Tell, completely different illustrator. But I searched for a specific type of illustration that I wanted for that book that really gave a diverse representation of all the students I've ever taught, whether it's their physical traits, their abilities, kids that when a child reads it, I want them to see that mathematician that might be inside of them, or that scientist, or that gymnast or baseball player. So I wanted that to be represented throughout the whole book. And Zoe, who was my illustrator for that one, really created that magic within that book as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love the idea that so many of the books, children's books in general, and yours specifically, are those inspirational books for kids that they need growing up. I know one of the favorite books I read to my kids was "Oh, the Places You'll Go," by Dr. Seuss. And it sounds like your books are kind of that similar sort of vein, where discovering those things about yourself that you're going to get along the way, and advice about walking with grace and overcoming adversity, and all that stuff is great. That's the message I think that's important to give kids. Right.
I think that as a teacher and being in the classroom for so many years, I was front and center and witnessing what children need and the things that they need and the type of encouragement they need. And so I'm very much, my philosophy of teaching is, yes, I want those academics, but I also want to build that character in that child, and that social emotional aspect needs to be addressed. And so I always try to think about that, put that kind of in the forefront when I create the writing that I do for children.
Right. And it's funny too, wrote that first one as a promise to your dad, and that's sort of like this, Roland, like we've heard this, that sort of thing before from other authors, where their first book was this promise they made to somebody important in their life, and then that sort of started them on the road. I like that kind of story too, that people, somebody sees something in you and they're like, you have a story to tell it, and it's their dying wish, and then the person goes ahead and does it and discovers, hey, this is actually fulfilling for me. It's not just this promise that I made. I went ahead and I did it, and now I've found something for that I got something out of it, and I want to continue doing it.
And the wonderful thing is you're leaving a family legacy. So your grandkids, your great grandkids, in 100 years time, your descendants might be like, oh look, this is a book that my great grandmother wrote. And it's kind of, yeah, you've got that in eternally.
Right. And I feel writing the 2 books with the daughter and father, and that really is a representation of my father and I and our relationship, that I'm carrying on his legacy as well, especially for my family. And so they see that. And one of the things, and you can do anything, that my illustrator did at the very end of the book, she illustrated a picture that I had of my father, on his 80th birthday. My dad passed when he was 89, but on his 80th birthday, we had gone to Yankee Stadium because he was from New York and huge Yankee fan. And we took him to Yankee Stadium on his 80th birthday. And she took that picture and she put it into the book, and she surprised me with it. I didn't know it was going to be in there, but it's just those kind of things that she put within the book that my family now continues to see his legacy continue to grow and continue to, be there. So that's just something that I wanted to make sure that my family had as well.
Yeah, that's great. Have you gotten feedback from people that you didn't know that have read the book, and what they thought about it and what their kids thought about it?
Yes, I constantly get different feedback from all 3. Well, you can do anything. A few people have seen it at this moment, but the first 2, yes. Lots of good feedback. Lots of I've presented at schools in my district. Presented to I obviously read the books to my students themselves, and there's a lot of really good feedback, and they again want and ask me again and again, when are you going to keep doing it? What's coming next? That's a great, I love that. That's like almost like you have your own little beta reader group. That's perfect. So you read it to them sort of like before you've even published it to make sure it's. Yes. With you have a story to tell. It was with Zoe, my illustrator, that was about a 6 to 8 month process where she would send me the sketches, and then we would see the growth from there and the progress. And I shared that whole experience with my students that I had that year. So every time I would get a sketch, I would share it with them. And then when it would become in color, they would see it. So they got to see the whole process of that book. And it actually was complete at the end of the school year, like the last couple weeks of school. So I was able to project it on the screen and read it to all of them. And that was just a beautiful experience because they really saw firsthand what it meant to be an author and what all of that entails. Because when you're teaching kids writing, many times they want to write the first time and then I'm done. And you have to kind of reiterate and keep telling them, well, there's a process to this. We need to go back and we need to fix things. We need to add things. And when they see it coming and they see that whole process and they were able to witness that, that really made an impact on them, and they really saw what it means to be a writer. And so that helped with them also moving forward and in their own writing experiences.
I love that.
Isn't that nice? You've encouraged a whole generation.
Yeah. And I agree, like showing them that process is like really, really important. How old are the kids that you teach?
8 and 9.
Okay. So around the age that you'd want to be reading this to, like this is your target audience, I guess, for these books is around that age.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
That's amazing. Most people don't have that built-in audience. Do you try to get the school boards to pick the books up, put it in the library, you give them a copy? Or
yes, I do. So the schools that I have gone to, visited, we've put them in their library. I just had before school ended, I had a principal buy a whole set for their staff. So it's slowly getting into the hands of children and in schools. So I'm kind of working, I'm sure with writing that marketing piece is huge. And when you have a full-time job doing something else, sometimes that gets put to the side at times. So I'm still, working my way through, and hopefully that will continue to, progress and grow as the books start to get into more and more hands. You have a story to tell. I've had high school teachers read it and middle school teachers read it. And they even say, even though it's a picture book and it's really my target audience is that younger group, that it's really a book for all ages. Remembering that your voice is important and that everybody has a story to tell. So I've gotten a lot of good feedback with that, for sure.
Yeah, marketing is always hard, but I was thinking, when you have that in already, you're already a teacher, you have the access to,
right.
School boards and stuff like that. Maybe that's sort of a shortcut that you can take. And I mean, you probably don't want to get up in front of the class and say, okay, kids, tell your parents you want to buy this book. But yeah, no, that's great. I like how integrated it is and everything. Maybe you should do a middle grade version of it for those older kids.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. So when you are writing these for the kids, especially you have that age group already, are you even asking them for their feedback in terms of specific things, or are you just basically watching their reactions as you read it, trying to determine whether or not you have their interest, I'm just wondering about that process, especially with those younger kids. With the beta readers, you can ask them a whole bunch of questions and they can give you all sorts of feedback, but with little kids, you don't want to necessarily do that. So I'm just wondering about whether or not you're actively sort of trying to pull that from them, or just sort of taking it from the cues as you read it to them.
I did both, especially with You Have a Story to Tell. I would look to see what it was that how their reaction was, but then I would ask them questions. And especially when we would put the words to the illustrations, I would ask them things about, well, what do you see and hear? And, the illustrations are so vibrant when they go into color that the kids are able to, I think they gravitate towards that as well. So there was a lot of feedback that I would get from them with that. And with that, sometimes there was a little tweak within that illustration that I would ask Zoe to, let's change it a little bit this way based upon the feedback that I would get from them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really, really useful. Do you have any sort of advice for other authors in terms of, things that they should think about specifically when they're writing books for this age group? If somebody has an idea for, a story that they want to write, and they've never written a children's book before, what sort of things should they sort of keep in mind and do that maybe is different than if you were writing for something else, for an older audience?
Well, I try to be very intentional with my writing, and I always focus on a certain message. And so I think understanding your audience and knowing what kind of messages need to be put out there for children is very big. And I think that's essential. And sometimes you won't know that unless you're actually with children themselves and kind of talk through that with them to see. All my books are really based on what my experiences, my personal experiences as a child, but as well as my experiences as an educator and what I see from children as to what it is that they need. There's always, as I said, I'm very intentional, and I'm thinking social emotional needs, and I'm thinking of areas and messages that I feel are really important for children. But I also know that, and I watch what children like to read as well. And, humor is a big thing in books that kids love. Now, I haven't attempted that realm yet. But I know that just as a teacher and being and witnessing that with kids, they love that bit of humor, something that's going to keep them wanting to read, something that's going to make them laugh. So I think if you integrate that also in some way into the book and into the story, that also is going to grab kids' attention. Yeah, I think that's really important as well.
I think that's great insight, because I heard someone say it's not a reader's responsibility to like be invested in a book. It's the author's responsibility to engage the reader. And unfortunately, in schools, sometimes there are books that get recommended and kids have to read that are not necessarily, we've got I don't know, my eldest son just read The Great Gatsby and we both enjoyed it, but there are other books like The Catcher in the Rye that you might not actually gel with, and it's kind of forced to read it. So when you get a book that is an enjoyable reading experience and keeps you engaged by using humor is like the most perfect thing. That sounds like a great way to make your book and its message stand out.
Right. And I think that as a writer and a reader, I mean, that's always been my passion. So it's my passion as a teacher as well. It's very important to me when I read books to kids that we're reading it for enjoyment, but there are times when we read it as a writer. What is it that this author did in this book to either create that message or maybe to keep us wanting to read? Or how did that author phrase that certain situation, so that kids see that they're not only thinking of it as a reader, but they're thinking of it as a writer, because that then helps them as they go to write themselves. And just having those discussions with them also can help to promote and themselves want to keep reading, because really our ultimate goal is that, Craig, earlier you said was it your son that finally found something that he really wants to read. Mm-hmm. And it's the same. I mean, I call it the home run books for my students. It's like, where's that book that you don't want to put down, that you keep wanting to read? And it's, for some kids, you really have to find that and discover it. So it's spending time reading, talking about books, looking at it as a writer and as a reader, and trying to find that book that's going to want to keep them wanting to go back to the shelf to continue to read. And sometimes and Roland, as you said, sometimes kids are asked to read something in class that maybe is not really catching their interest. So it's like, what then are we going to do to then give them other opportunities that they are able to experience reading as an enjoyment? My own children, when they were in elementary school, a lot of their reading was attached to a test. It's like, they kept having to get higher and higher on the scores. And so that really diminished their enjoyment for many years. Because I was being an educator. I mean, I was reading to my kids when they were in the womb. I mean, from day one, and every day I read to them. Even when they were in middle school, we'd sit and read chapter books together. But my daughter didn't find really that love until she was in college. And I think that when she was in elementary school, everything was so attached to, I have to pass this test.
Yeah.
That the enjoyment of reading was lost. And I think we have to remember that we need to find books that they can enjoy as well. That's going to prolong that and that desire for them to want to continue to read.
Yeah, that's what we talked a little bit before we started, and that's where I'd mentioned, my son for a long time didn't like reading at all, and then he eventually found like the book that brought him into reading. And now, I mean, I can't pry the Kindle from his hand. He reads constantly, but within that same the fantasy world kind of genre. Whereas with my daughter, I haven't yet found the book that will get her to read. But I think that is one of the challenges. But it's the most important challenge, right? You want to build. You want to get kids to get a love of reading, and as you said, when you force them to read things that they don't want to read, and that, you know, that's kind of like what's happened with my daughters, and that's all she's ever sort of been exposed to, then it becomes like, well, reading's boring and the stories are stupid and blah 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 blah, right? So they have to, you know, so the challenge of an author, especially for those younger ones, is making it so engaging. And the trick too with the young stuff where the parents are reading to the children, you almost have to engage the parents too. If the parents don't like the book, regardless of what the message is, if the parents don't like the book for whatever reason, they're not going to want to read it to their kids. And you know, speaking from experience, sometimes you're going to read the same book over and over and over again, right? And you know, if it's something that's really annoying for some reason, you might be like, why don't we pick a different one? You know, so you know, you want to kind of engage both the young child and their parent, and sometimes that's tricky. Do you ever think about that when you're writing? Is this going to will the parents reading this be willing to reread this to their kids, or is there something here that you know is going to stop them from doing it, or do you really just focus on, you know, the child?
No, I do. I think about the parents. So whenever I get my beta readers, I had a select, you know, an array of different type of beta readers, and some of them are parents themselves, and having them look at it from a perspective of a parent. Would you read this to your child? You know, what parts of the book do you feel are the most engaging, and which parts maybe, you know, do I need to refine or change? So I try to get a different types of people to read the books before, so I get an understanding coming from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, it's really important. Sure.
I was going to ask you, one of the challenges of writing a children's book, of course, is that the children's book, they generally do better as physical books, and for a self-published author that can be a challenge. And I noticed you've gone through Lulu, which is a great publisher. You've got the paperback available on Amazon. Your telling a story book is that done through a publisher rather than self-published? I was just looking.
No, it's self-published, so it's my LLC. So I just created an LLC for myself. So it's self-published, but I did offset printing for my hardback. So it's sold through my website. And then I did do KDP for the paperback. So it's sold on Amazon currently in the paperback and Barnes and Noble. But the hardbound book is sold through my website. So it's, I did offset printing for that because to me, the message is so important to me, as well as the illustrations are so beautiful that really KDP doesn't do it justice of what it looks like as a hardbound book. So I wanted to really do quality printing for that. And you can do anything. I did the same thing. It'll go on KDP as a paperback, but I do have the hard copy that I do have as offset printing. That's on my website.
I mean, even though I've sold the majority of my books as Kindle books, there is nothing like reading a physical book, especially when you're a kid. Right.
Yeah. I did put You Have a Story to Tell on as Kindle, but yeah, I would rather have the physical book when it's a picture book than looking through a screen. There's just a big difference when you have it in your hands. And I think especially for kids.
Yeah, and I mean, most people's, even though they have color versions now, most people are looking at a black and white e-reader, right? And you lose so much when it comes to picture books. You know, you can put it on your tablet as a PDF, but, you know, get that full color, but it's still not quite the same as, you know. Plus, a lot of parents, I mean, these days you have that struggle of trying to limit electronics from your child, right? So if bedtime is one of those times where you kind of want to wind things down, take the electronics out of the room and you know, calm the mind a bit. And then if that requires you to pull out your Kindle or your tablet to swipe through a book, that kind of defeats the purpose a bit. So yeah, I think one of the, as much as people move towards Kindle books, I think with children's books, that's one of the last ones that's ever going to disappear, if ever, from, you know, that physical world. So,
Yeah.
So, you know, going back to that idea of how to I guess, get kids to become lifelong readers. That's one of those things that is important, I think, to you and to me and Roland and most parents. Like we said, it is a lot of the time, I think, finding the book, finding the one thing that maybe it's the genre, maybe it's the author. You know, I know with my son, I forget what the first book he read was, but he then, it was I think part of a series, and he ended up reading, you know, all the series anyway, only reading, you know, from that author. But then you know, I was like, hey, other people read these kind of books as well. And then I got him a Kindle Unlimited. You know, he's not so discerning. You know, he'll take anything. You know, he'll just like searches by genre now and just reads everything that there is. But you know, you don't always know what it is that is going to hook somebody. So what are your thoughts on that, and how to turn kids into lifelong readers when you're an author? Like, what should you be thinking about in terms of that? And should is it an author's responsibility, or is it a parent's responsibility? You know, where does that lie, and what sort of things, in your opinion, should authors feel responsible for and try to work towards?
Well, I think that as an author, you need to think about all those perspectives. You know, what is it that my book is going to do for this child, whether it's a message that you're trying to convey or just you writing it just for enjoyment. I think I know for myself as an author, when I think about what I write, is this going to keep them wanting to come back? As I said before, I'm very intentional with what I write about and the messages that I provide. So is it something that they're going to want to read again? You know, is this message going to be something that they're going to look at and think, oh, you know, I want to go back to that book. I want to read it again.
Have kids, read it to their kids.
Right. Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always am thinking in that perspective as well. What is it that I can convey in this story that is going to be something that somebody's going to want to pick up more than one time and want to continue to read? I think when we're trying to develop lifelong readers within children, you know, and in my case, students, and even my own children back when they were young, it's giving them an array of opportunities to read multiple genres and trying to find that genre that's really going to stick with them. Because if you think about it as an adult, I know for me, there's specific genres that I really love. And there's other things that I just don't interest me at all. So thinking about what's going to keep them, what's the genre that's going to keep them wanting to go back. And that's really a very exploratory process. You've got to expose them to lots of different genres. And I think it's also talking about the books with them. I think as a parent sitting and reading with them, sometimes parents think that, oh, when they become that, proficient reader at 3rd grade, 4th grade, whatever grade it is, we don't need to sit with them anymore. They just need to read on their own. But my whole philosophy is you need to keep going and reading with them. They need to be able to sit and read and see you read as an adult, because I think that continues to create that lifelong reading. Even though it took my children, you know, my daughter until college, I do believe that the exposure that I gave her through her life and constantly reading and going to the library and talking about books, that helped her as she moved into adulthood. So I think it's that exposure. I have parents ask me all the time, how do I get my child to read this? Or I want them to only to read the classics. And I will say to them, that we want to expose them to that. But right now, really your goal is to get them to enjoy their reading. So let them read whatever it is that they want to read. If it's a graphic novel and it's keeping their interest, then let them read that. As long as it's appropriate for their age. But if it's something that's going to keep them wanting to read, that's where you're going to create that enjoyment for them.
I'd even say if it's not necessarily appropriate for the age. I got into reading, one of the first books I read when I was like 7 was Day of the Triffids. And, that's probably not appropriate for a 7-year-old, but I loved it. And I had a love of science fiction ever after that. So,
yeah. And I think as a parent, you decide, right? You decide what it is that would be appropriate for your child. But I think we need to let them kind of explore that. And, because sometimes parents think, oh, they're only reading that specific genre. And then my response is, but they're reading. So if we want them to keep reading, let's let them do that. And then we can continue to expose them to other genres. Whether I do that in my classroom, whether you read with them at night, you pick a book together and you read, but let them read what's keeping their enjoyment, because that's going to create that love of reading.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think when I was in school, I remember reading back then, it was like Shakespeare. I don't even think I don't know. In my kids' classes, they never did any Shakespeare, and back in our day, that was what we had to read all the time. And I am not a fan of reading Shakespeare, and I wasn't back then. I'm still probably not, although I haven't tried it in a while. But if that was the main exposure I had to reading, I probably would have been put off of it for a lot of my life. But luckily I had already been reading on my own and found what I liked to read long before that. So, but the ability to read and consume knowledge is important in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's a skill that you need to build. And if you force kids to read things they don't like, they're just going to avoid reading, and that is going to hurt them. It's not just about the, what they're going to read in their spare time, but you read to learn throughout your life.
Right.
So exactly. You want to make sure that you foster that. And yeah, like you said, if it's graphic novels, if it's whatever, it's going to get them. Like I see it with my daughter, like she avoids reading because, she just was never into it. And what she reads in school, and I've seen some of the stuff she reads in school, and I don't blame her, like it's just boring. But that means that, now in her life, when things come up, she doesn't read to try to figure those things out. And I think that's one of the things I worry a little bit about.
So definitely, there's reading is the foundation for so many things in every single subject, right? Kids need to be able to read textbooks and read, it's the foundation. I think it also it helps children with their writing. So the more that they read and the more that are exposed to the written word, it helps them as a writer. And so it's real.
I them to write it too.
Right. And if they're shut down to reading, they usually have that struggle with writing. And so it's really working on where can we grow that love of reading, and that, again, looking at it as from a writer's perspective, because they go together. And so we really have to find ways to make sure that they want to continue to do that and want to be reading, because ultimately it's going to transfer over into their writing as well.
I think that's, I think that's a brilliant perspective. Now, I was going to say, unfortunately, we're coming up to the top of the hour, but Craig, do you have any additional questions or for Bridget?
No, listen, I think that this is one of those really important topics that not just the idea that, how to write for kids, but how to sort of get them to become lifelong readers. And, a lot of that is on the shoulders of parents, but it's also on the shoulders of the authors writing for them. And so I think it's always something to keep in mind that, it's not just about the story you're telling, but it's about sort of telling it in a way that is going to, entertain the kids in a way that's going to make them like reading, and not, you know, just like, if you're writing for those young children, that they're at that stage, you're not writing Shakespeare for them. You're not writing this dense workbook that they, you know, you're writing to entertain them, and that will hopefully foster this sort of like spark in them that when they see a book, they're going to be excited and not be like, So, and that's, I think, an important thing for all of us to remember. So thanks for coming on and, you know, giving us your perspective on all that, and especially as an educator, not to mention somebody who writes for children. I think, you know, your perspective on this has been really great to hear.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
It was a delight to have you. Now, Bridget, for everyone listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, where can they go to find out more about you and more about your books?
My website is my name, www.bridgetgengler.com. And that's where my books are, and everything about me is there. Also, Instagram. I'm on Instagram at Bridget Gengler. That's really the platform that I use the most.
You've got a very nice website, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, we'll put a link down to your website down in the description of this video. So if you have enjoyed everything that Bridget has had to share with us today, make sure you scroll down there, click on that link, and go and check out all her stuff. And while you're there, you will also pass that big empty comment section. So make sure you pause, leave Bridget a comment, let her know how much you've appreciated everything she shared with us today. And while you're down there, there's also that subscribe button. If you haven't already, you can smash that like button, as the kids say. And there is a bell icon that you can tap to get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode of Fully Booked coming out this time next week. So until then, cheerio.